Good afternoon. My name's Debbie, and I have a question for you. Has anyone ever showed you a picture of what codependency looks like and how it started? So if you have never seen a picture of a family tree, then you might be a little confused, but I'm going to show you a family tree picture. So in our family tree picture, we have a female and a male. And this is a biological female and a biological male because that's generally how we all get started, right? So they might have children, and maybe this family had 2 boys. Now before this mom also had a family, and she may have had a brother and a sister, but she had 2 parents as well. And the father here, he may have had only 1 sister, or he may have had more, and he has a father and a mother as well. So when we're looking at family trees, we kind of think, oh yeah, I have a whole big family. But when we're talking about addiction, we tend to think, well, I'm the one with the addiction, and so everyone else is codependent with me. And it becomes a little bit of a myopic thinking that it's all of the world relates to me. When in reality, you had parents before you, and so did your spouse. Now, one of the symptoms of codependency is anxiety and depression, or the other thing that somebody might do if they are in a relationship with a codependent person is to be hyper-controlling, or maybe rigid. I'm not sure if you can see all of this writing on the video, but I'm doing the best I can to stay out of the way. So when these symptoms show up, we generally associate that with somebody in the family has been addicted to something, whether it's gambling or food or hoarding or alcohol or substances. And everyone then learns to kind of insulate or protect the person who has the addiction. So that's why the spouse will have anxiety, depression, or rigidity and control. And the children also will learn to tiptoe around the house maybe when the person with the addiction is hungover, or when maybe they've spent all the money gambling and so they're angry, or they are participating in their substance abuse. They're either high or passed out. So they cover for them and they say, oh, they just worked hard yesterday. They learned to lie, and they don't invite other people over to the house because they don't want anybody to see, because they're embarrassed by the person who has the addiction. And so a lot of these things happen to insulate and protect the person, and actually to insulate and protect the family, because they're all embarrassed. So this person, even though they're addicted, somebody else in their family before them was probably addicted to something. Could be workaholism, it could be any other addiction. It doesn't have to be the same addiction. And the other person in their family also suffered from the anxiety or the depression or the control. And so these people in this generation already set the stage, because the person who is addicted now was already codependent with these people. So for those of you who are thinking it's all about you, it's not all about you. It's a family system. And it's a family system that you learned. And codependency is something that we learn, like your children are learning. Maybe if you have an addiction or your spouse has an addiction, your children are learning how to cope with that addiction and to cover and to protect the family name by not talking about, or by making excuses for that other person's behavior. But before that generation, somebody else already learned the person with the addiction already learned how to make excuses for the generation before them. So most of the time, unless there has been a sentinel event, most of the time, every person who's addicted, I want you to hear this, they were already codependent before they ever became an addict of any kind. Maybe that's reassuring, maybe it's frightening, maybe it's sad. There's a lot of emotions that can go along with that. But most of the time, it should be reassuring that you've already learned a behavior before you became addicted. And the behavior you learned led you down a path and you made your own choices, but it led you down a path to develop a family system in your family that was similar to the family system in which you grew up. Sometimes we don't even recognize what the things are that are causing our codependency, because we might say, well, no one in my family has ever done anything. So let's just pretend like it's this person. And the husband says, no one in my family ever had any kind of an addiction. There's never any alcohol. There's never any substance abuse. There was nothing that went on in our family. And I'll say to them, well, okay, were either one of your parents considered a workaholic? Oh, well, yeah, they were both considered a workaholic. They had their own business and we didn't ever do anything. It was always about the business, and they both were workaholics. So then I'll say, well, then tell me about their grandparents. And so then they'll go and tell me about their parents, and I find out that, maybe there was a bunch of kids in this person's family, and, well, come to find out, this grandpa was in the war, and he was in the Great War, and he actually had a big problem with alcohol, but we don't talk about him. So that's another indicator that something is going on, because this person was actually cut off from the rest of the family. We didn't talk about him. We didn't ever go see him. And then mom, instead of becoming an alcoholic or substance user, she becomes a workaholic. And this is still an indicator that there is an addiction. She doesn't know how to limit things and to do things in moderation. So everything's over the top. It's got to be all or nothing. And that's how a workaholic ends up in their life. Everything becomes an all or nothing situation. It might be 2 or 3 generations before you find out something like this has gone on. In any case, there was still a family history, even though it looked like no one had an addiction here. And they can't figure out how their son got married to someone with an addiction, or maybe even their daughter ends up with an addiction as well. They can't figure out, how did their kids get addictions when we didn't ever have one? Because we worked to not do that, because, great grandpa up here was somebody that we didn't even want to be around. So keep all of this in mind as people are talking about codependency and addiction, and start to evaluate your life and think, is it possible that maybe I've been affected by my family of origin more than I wanted to admit? If you have an addiction, then start to evaluate how your family was. Maybe you learned codependency for generations, like this family did, before you ever really started using any substances yourself. But what are the things that are not talked about? What are the things that are secrets? What are the relationships that were completely cut off, and were they cut off because of an addiction? What contributed to your life being the way that it is now? And is it possible that maybe if you dealt with some of these things that are in your family, that you might not feel the need to self-medicate? It's just a thought. Have a great day, everybody. And this is just a thought on codependency. Bye-bye.